When I walked into the church that morning, the whole room seemed to freeze. Conversation stopped mid-sentence, and every face turned toward me like I was a ghost. Before I even reached the second pew, the whispers started. Some people gasped, others leaned in, saying my name like I was some long-forgotten scandal suddenly come back to life. It had been over 10 years since most of them had seen me, since I quietly stepped away from their world of garden parties, polite gossip, and Christmas cards, and now here I was, showing up at my ex-husband's funeral like a storm they didn't expect. Martin Lane, the man I once loved, now rested in a sleek oak coffin at the front of the sanctuary. White roses surrounded him, soft music played in the background. His second wife, Candace, sat in the front row, gently pressing a tissue to her dry eyes. Next to her were our daughters, Rachel and Claire. Their faces were stiff, their eyes avoiding mine, as if I no longer belonged, as if I hadn't once been their everything. I knew I wasn't welcome. That space hadn't been mine for years, but I didn't come to be seen or to get closure. I came because, despite all that had happened, Martin had once been my home, and part of me, maybe the part still mourning, needed to see how it ended. As I walked down the side aisle, I caught little bits of people whispering, "Is that really her? Why would she even come?" I didn't flinch. I kept walking, head high, back straight, hands calm. I sat quietly in the last pew and folded my coat beside me. My heart pounded, but my face stayed calm. If they were waiting for drama, they'd be disappointed. I didn't come to reclaim a place in their lives. I came to honor how I survived without them. There was a time I thought Martin and I were building something beautiful, not just a marriage, but a life, a partnership filled with late nights, quiet compromises, and a kind of trust built from scratch. I was 27, fresh out of art school, full of hope and paint. He was a business grad, driven, sharp, already thinking in numbers. We met at a friend's barbecue. I spilled lemonade on his shoes. He laughed. I said sorry a dozen times. That night, he asked me to share a grilled peach with him. It wasn't perfect, but it was real. We were real. We married the next spring, a small wedding, nothing fancy, a simple church, a borrowed veil, and a cake from the grocery store. We didn't care. We were in love. We moved into a tiny apartment above a hardware store. We ate ramen, dreamed about the future, and talked about someday. Someday he'd start his own business. Someday I'd have my own art studio. Someday life would feel easier. Eventually, it did. Martin's financial consulting firm took off. Money came. We moved into a big house in the suburbs. He wore custom suits. I stayed home with the girls, Rachel and Claire, and painted when I could. Our home was warm. I picked every paint color. I planted the garden. I framed the girls' drawings like they were museum pieces. I organized birthdays, helped at school events, remembered everyone's favorite cake. Martin got the spotlight. I kept the rhythm going behind the scenes. At first, I didn't mind being in the background. I thought love meant being the steady one, the invisible glue. But now, looking back, I see how alone I was in that belief. The changes started slowly, like dust, not disaster. Martin began coming home later. He blamed work. I believed him. We had been through hard times before, and I knew how much he wanted success. But something felt different. When he came home, he no longer noticed if the lights were on or if I had dinner ready. He stopped asking about my day. I'd show him my latest painting, and he'd mumble, "That's nice," without even looking. He wasn't cruel, just distant. I thought it was just a rough patch. All marriages have them. You keep going, you keep loving, you make coffee, fold laundry, stay patient. But the silence between us kept growing. He didn't notice the new curtains I made. He forgot about my art class. He smiled more at his phone than at me. Still, I didn't accuse him of anything. I didn't want to be the jealous wife. I didn't want to beg for attention. So I gave him grace, until even that felt like I was disappearing. The girls didn't notice. Why would they? Martin still showed up with big gifts and made them laugh. I was the one reminding them to brush their teeth and finish their homework. That kind of love doesn't shine. It doesn't get noticed next to vacations and glitter. But deep inside, I felt the cracks forming, and I knew, by the time I found the courage to speak up, it might already be too late. The night of the gala was supposed to be special. Martin was receiving a big award. I wanted to be there for him. I wore a midnight blue dress, the one he once said made me look like starlight. I wore the silver necklace Martin gave me on our 20th anniversary. I curled my hair the way he used to like, soft and natural. I didn't do it to impress anyone. I did it for him, for the memories of who we used to be. The ballroom was beautiful that night. Lights sparkled through tall windows, and a string quartet played softly at the entrance. Martin was in his element, shaking hands, laughing, completely at ease. I stood quietly near the bar, holding a glass of white wine, smiling when someone looked my way, but no one really saw me. Then it happened. One of Martin's business partners walked over. Martin waved me over and said, "Oh, that's Meredith. She keeps me sane." Everyone laughed. I smiled too, but inside, something went cold. Not my wife, not my partner, just someone who keeps him calm, like a candle or background music. It was a small comment, but it hit hard. Later, he gave a speech accepting his award. He thanked everyone, his team, his mentors, even his late father, but not me. On the drive home, I asked, "Did you mean what you said, that I just keep you sane?" He didn't even look at me. It was a joke. Don't be so sensitive. That word, sensitive, stuck with me. It wasn't anger or pain he saw, just an overreaction. That's when I realized I had been disappearing, slowly, quietly, for years. After that night, the silence between us grew heavier, not loud or cruel, just heavy enough to drown me. Martin stopped looking at me during dinner. He answered in one-word replies. When I laughed or tried to share something, he kept his eyes on his phone. So I stopped. I stopped making his favorite meals. Stopped waiting up when he worked late. Stopped asking if he'd be home for dinner. Grief doesn't always come from loss. Sometimes it comes from being invisible in your own home. Our daughters were growing up. Rachel was applying to grad school. Claire was all about debate club. They adored their dad. Why wouldn't they? He took them on ski trips, bought them new phones, posted sweet birthday captions. I was just the background noise, the one who reminded them to eat vegetables and check their calendars. They didn't hear the edge in his voice when he said my name. They didn't see how I had stopped trying to be heard. Then came our 30th anniversary. I cooked his favorite meal, lemon chicken, mashed potatoes, roasted carrots. I lit candles, wore a dress, opened a special bottle of wine. He never came home. No text, no call. By midnight, I blew out the candles, cleaned the dishes, and sat alone at the edge of our bed. At 7 a.m., he walked in wearing the same clothes. "Didn't you get my message?" he said casually. Dinner ran long. I stayed at the hotel. There was no message. I poured him his coffee, just the way he liked it, but something inside me cracked. I wasn't just heartbroken anymore. I was done chasing scraps. Love doesn't always break with shouting. Sometimes it ends with silence so deep you can't hear yourself anymore. It was a Tuesday. I was folding laundry, his shirts, still warm from the dryer, when he walked in and said it like he was commenting on the weather. "I think it'd be better if we had some space." No fight, no emotion, just the end of a marriage, handed off like a car key. I froze, holding a pale blue shirt. My heart didn't break, it had already been breaking for years. I was just waiting for the moment when it finally gave out. "You want me to move out?" I asked quietly. He shrugged. "It doesn't have to be dramatic. We've been living separate lives anyway." He didn't mention another woman, but I'd smelled her perfume, sweet and strong, not mine. By then, Rachel was living with her fiancé, and Claire was away at school. No one else saw the final pieces fall apart. No need for big scenes or goodbyes. I packed slowly over 3 days, not rushed, just deliberate. I left the wedding album, the fancy dishes, the crystal from our anniversaries. I took my mother's cookbook, my art supplies, and a few childhood drawings the girls had made. When I shut the front door behind me, suitcase in hand, I didn't cry. I didn't feel proud either. I felt empty, but at least I had stopped falling. Months later, after moving into a small condo in Savannah, I finally unpacked the last few boxes. Most were full of things I hadn't been ready to face: old paints, photos, birthday cards from the girls, and letters from my brother, Ray. Ray had died the year before. He was the only one who truly showed up during my divorce. He'd bring groceries, wine, and just sit with me, never pushing, always present. At the bottom of one worn box marked studio, I found an envelope in Ray's handwriting. "Meredith, when you're ready." Inside were 2 letters, one from Ray, one from Martin. Ray's note was simple. "I found this when I helped you pack. I didn't know when to give it to you. You looked so broken. I didn't want to make it worse. But you deserve the truth, all of it." My hand shook as I opened Martin's letter. The ink was faded, the paper creased. "Meredith." If you're reading this, it means I never had the courage to say it out loud. What followed wasn't quite an apology. But it was a confession. A truth I never expected to hear. And it didn't change the past. But it changed the meaning. For the first time, I wasn't the villain in his story. And more importantly, I realized I never was the villain in mine. The letter didn't take away the pain, but it opened something in me. Not anger, not even sadness, just a quiet clarity. Maybe I hadn't been invisible after all. I didn't frame the letter. I didn't reread it 100 times. I folded it once, placed it in a small wooden box with a few other things I couldn't let go of, and slid it to the back of my closet. Then I made tea and stood at the window as the sun rose, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't dread the day ahead. Change didn't come overnight. I didn't suddenly find purpose or feel whole again. But I started doing small things differently. I asked the community center if they still needed help with art classes. I said yes to coffee invites. I said no when Claire asked if I'd be willing to meet with Candace just to make things easier. I picked up a paintbrush again, not to impress, not to be good, just to remember what it felt like to create. I painted messy florals, memories in color, pieces of myself I'd forgotten. It wasn't about finding the woman I used to be. It was about becoming someone new, someone who didn't need to be needed to feel whole. Piece by piece, I built a life that belonged entirely to me. Not in defiance, not out of bitterness. Just in quiet, steady freedom. Then something unexpected happened. I got a call from Thomas Greer, Martin's longtime attorney, asking if I could attend the reading of his will. At first, I thought it was a mistake. We were divorced. Surely everything would go to Candace or our daughters. But Thomas was vague. There are provisions you'll want to hear for yourself, he said. So I went. Candace sat at the head of the conference table, rigid, cold. Rachel and Claire were on either side of her, tight-lipped. I sat across from them in silence. Thomas read through the formalities, then paused. To Meredith Lane, he said, the property at 43, Abington Place in Charleston is returned in full, debt-free. Gasps echoed across the table. That was our house, the one Martin and I bought, the one I helped design, the one Candace moved into when I left. I didn't even look at her. Then came the second surprise. To Meredith Lane, the Martin Lane Creative Arts Fund, $480,000, is to be established in her name, supporting women over 50 in creative pursuits. Finally, Thomas unfolded a personal letter. If Meredith is in the room, then she's stronger than I ever was. I never said this when I should have. She deserves everything I failed to give her. No one spoke. And in that silence, for the first time, I felt the weight shift. Not out of revenge, but out of truth finally allowed to exist. Candace stood and left without a word. Rachel stared at the table. Claire blinked away tears but said nothing. I thanked Thomas and walked out quietly, without looking back. I didn't come for drama. I came for closure. And I got it. Not the way I expected, but exactly how I needed. A week later, I returned to the Charleston house. The key still worked. The garden was wild, but beneath the overgrowth, the hydrangeas I once planted were still blooming. The house felt smaller now. But I didn't mind. I wasn't there to relive the past. I was there to reclaim what was still mine. Then, another call. You might want to sit down, Thomas said. Candace had tried to challenge the will, claimed emotional pressure. She lost. And in the process, the court found something else, a portfolio Martin had hidden during our divorce. Stocks, properties, a business registered under someone else's name. Technically, they should have been split back then. Which meant they were mine now. Estimated total, $1, $3 million. I didn't cry, I didn't laugh. I just exhaled. Not because of the money, but because I hadn't left with nothing after all. I just hadn't known what was waiting for me. I used part of it to create the Ray Lane Scholarship, for women over 50 in the arts. The rest I kept, not for revenge, but for rebuilding. And that, I've learned, is what real healing looks like. Not the loud kind that demands to be seen, but the quiet kind that finally knows its own worth.